Barack Obama's plan to meet the Dalai Lama is threatening to further sour the already bitter relationship between China and the US. Beijing is already irate at Washington's move to sell billions of dollars worth of weapons to Taiwan.
And Google's threat to pull out of China over censorship laws is yet another issue dividing the two world powers. Professor Geoffrey Garrett is from the US Studies Centre and he joins us now in Sydney. Professor, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Virginia. It's my pleasure.
Well, seeing the Dalai Lama is one thing, but sending billions of dollars of armaments to Taiwan is quite another. China is always going to see that as a threat to its own interests. So why is the US doing it?
Well, this is actually goes back at least 3 decades for the US. There's a Taiwan Act that the government must follow that says it has to support the defense of Taiwan. I think with the Google incident, Taiwan, Dalai Lama, and even going back last year to President Obama's visit, the big story is that frictions between the US and China are always going to be there, but China now is being much more assertive, I think, in expressing its interests than we've seen certainly for many years.
And why? Why so assertive now?
Well, I think the big story is that it goes back to the financial crisis. 12 months ago or so, people were concerned that maybe the Chinese growth miracle might suffer a real hiccup with declining demand for Chinese goods around the world. That didn't happen. China came through the global financial crisis extremely well, and so now China's feeling confident and they're willing to lecture and hector the US on a range of subjects.
Well, for some, this is President Obama finally standing up to China after what some in America call an early unsteady performance. What do you think?
It's always going to be a tough one. I think if you're the US president, what you've got to do is hold dear to America's core principles about freedom, about sovereignty, self-determination and the like. But at the same time, you've got to be a realist. And the realist position says the US-China economic relationship today is critical not only to the US and to China, but to the world, and that stability in US-China relations are also critical. So you can't betray your principles, but at the end of the day, both sides have big incentives to manage down their tensions. So that's why I think really this is more a China story, a new Chinese assertiveness story, rather than a change in Obama's position.
What's interesting, David Rothkopf in Foreign Policy magazine just recently is suggesting that perhaps this is the domestic politics of having a whipping boy driving foreign policy, the whipping boy, and a very easy one for Democrats being China. Do you see a little bit of that?
Of course that's there. What we have in the US is an alliance between the human rights left, the get tough on China right, and then of course people in the middle of the country who say, listen, our standard of living is going down, and the reason it's going down is China is an unfair player on the global economic stage. So pressure from Congress to get tough on China is a constant in American politics, and it's really up to the president from both sides of the aisle, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, to manage down those pressures and manage the relationship with China, because it's just so important.
But I think that sort of defines it itself, doesn't it, really? I mean, it's so important that really so much of this can only be seen as posturing, because the two countries are locked in that relationship of mutual enhancement, aren't they? They need each other.
Yeah, they need each other. I think.
So a lot of this just simply must be that rhetorical posturing that really won't affect any serious change between the two countries in terms of trade in particular.
Well, I think there's actually an on the one hand, on the other hand here. The tensions, the real economic tensions between the two countries after the global financial crisis are very real, and they're expanding, because both sides now think that this codependent but asymmetric relationship they have doesn't make a lot of sense. So the pressures are real. But by the same token, both sides know that they can't afford a blow-up over something like Taiwan or the Dalai Lama or trade. So I think we'll see this dance continuing for a while, but I would expect the volume of the dance, the volume of tensions to increase.
To increase and to actually result in some kind of blow-up? And do you want to define what that blow-up might be?
Well, I think in the short to medium term, economics will be more important than geopolitics and security issues in the relationship. So the big pressure at the moment, I think, out of the US is for China to let its exchange rate to float. The Chinese have said they certainly won't bow to external pressure, but they maybe have domestic incentives to let their currency appreciate a bit to cool down the Chinese economy. If that doesn't happen, I think that's the one place that could be a real focal issue where the pressure on Barack Obama, particularly with 10% unemployment in the US, could become so strong that he'd have to try to do something. And that would be a very big story and a real danger, I think, to the world economy.
Geoffrey Garrett, good to talk to you again. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Virginia.